All right, here we go. This is episode number 8 of the Project Herpetoculture podcast. I'm your host, Roy Arthur Blodgett, joined by my co-host, Philip Leitz. And a little bit of housekeeping before we introduce our guests. We are part of the Animals at Home Network. Thank you to Dylan for that, for hosting us. And also want to acknowledge that we have a sponsor now, Custom Reptile Habitats. We have an affiliate link posted on the YouTube and the show notes. So if you make a purchase through that link, a little kickback will come to us, and that'll help us keep the show going, keep the lights on over here. So with that stuff out of the way, I'd like to introduce our guest today, which is Ashley Dezan of Northern Lights Reptile Imports and Solar Flare Reptiles. Is that right?
Yeah, I've been pretty bad in keeping up with that, but yes.
Well, just to start, I wonder if you could introduce those operations and kind of what you do. What's your role in herpetoculture for those who don't already know?
So what I'm most known for is Northern Lights Reptile Imports. This is something that's been roughly, it used to be under a different name, but it's been in the works for 6-7 years now. The focus of that has always been importing animals over from Europe and Russia that were mostly, like, for the most part, like 90-95% captive born and bred animals. And I don't really import things like crested geckos, leopard geckos, unless it's like a pet relocation or something. But my main focus is for the species to be here in North America. And if it's not an uncommon species, it's to add bloodline diversity to an already, I don't want to say diminished lineage, but more or less just to, add in all the good stuff when it's needed. So that's my main bread and butter. But on the side, I am also a hobbyist. That's where my heart is. And I focus on the really rare and obscure species. And so I have solar flare reptiles, which was supposed to be to have people watch what I do without me having to accept 500 friend requests on Facebook. But I've been
it's a good strategy
on that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I got to keep up on that. I haven't. Whoopsie. But it didn't make sense for me to sell my animals under an import business name when they're not technically imports, correct? So it's kind of hard to keep up on, but that is what it is.
Right on. Yeah, it seems like you in my observations of your keeping over the last few years, I feel like you have had demonstrated this kind of knack for being able to acclimate and keep some really sensitive species, particularly of snakes. And curious if you could give a little bit of insight into what your kind of protocol is. Like, how do you decide how to acclimate something, whether or not it's treat right away or wait, or everyone has kind of a different take on that. So I'm curious about that, and also kind of what you're working with right now. I know you've got some pretty awesome obscure projects over there in that vein.
So I'm the black sheep, I guess we could say, of everybody when it comes to acclimating. I really don't sell out my collection very much for this very reason. So all the really weird species, as you know, like Chironeus, Pseudoxenodon, and some weird, Boiga species, they're beyond sensitive. And I've come to find out through trial and error and observation through other people, when you get them in and you put them in that sterile quarantine environment, they're dead. You're asking them to die the second you put them in there. They go from a lush jungle, let's say, to this bin of paper towel with a water bowl and maybe a hide, maybe some fake foliage. But it's such a drastic difference of the two, and there isn't much you could do in terms of humidity control. Even if it's humid, it's humid. You don't have drier areas, you don't have more humid, you don't have more damp. Like those humid hides, I guess people call them, that does nothing. It's nothing at all. And temperature wise, there's no control. It's one or the other. And when you go outside, even to like the edge of a forest. Doesn't matter where you are in the world. From the edge of the forest to even 5 feet in, it's a huge difference. Under the leaves, above the leaves, under a piece of bark, like bush, like it's such a vast difference that these animals can figure out and, thermoregulate or whatever it is. And you can't do that in a quarantine bin. These animals literally just came out of the wild, and you're putting them in this crazy sterile setup. They're not gonna live. And when it comes to that, four of these enclosures are empty right now, and they are sitting there for whatever might come next. So when I get something in that I want to work with, like, of course, like I'm going to look over it, make sure there's no mite issues, no external parasites of any kind, or no obvious ailments going on, like some bacterial infections or something. I'll observe them, like I'll soak them for a while, just make sure nothing's falling off them. I'll give them a bit of a diluted neem. Well, I guess you can't really dilute neem, but it's like a neem oil and water mixture. And I just kind of rub it on them a little bit, just in case if there are any mites. And I find that actually that kills off any rogue mite there might be. It's super safe. I'm not a fan of using permethrin unless I absolutely have to. I only do that with my imports, like once the imports are gone or just prior. But so I treat them externally that way as a precaution. If they have absolutely nothing on them, they all outwardly and act fine, they go straight into one of these enclosures. And I know that's a risk. Like, what about a parasite load? This and that. I know people are always weirded out about parasites. And that's where I differ hugely. Like, yes, parasites, you don't want parasites, but I will not treat an animal unless I have to. You're basically introducing a poison into their body to an already very stressed animal that just came out of the wild. And especially if you put it into a quarantine bin and you immediately treat it, you're killing it. And that's just, it's like, if you're stressed and you're eating a poison, what's going to happen? Your body's just going to shut down. And one thing I always tell people, like, as long as the animal is healthy, you really shouldn't even have to worry. Captive bred animals are full of parasites, more so, in my opinion, potentially than a wild caught, depending on the scenario. Crickets carry pinworm. You're going to treat every single cricket you feed to your bearded dragon? Are you going to treat your bearded dragon every month as a precaution to get rid of pinworm? Or if someone that's breeding mice, especially when they're in heavy duty, like not heavy duty, but like very confined environments, and you have like 50 mice, let's say, in a bin, you don't think that you're not going to be spreading worms left, right, and center to each other? And it's stuff like that. Like, yeah, people feed frozen, but not everybody does. There's still live feeders out there, and your neighbor, the dog next door, the bird up in the tree, we all have something. Nobody is going to be clean ever, and that's just the fact of life. And so I don't tend to treat any of my animals for that reason. Unless there's an obvious issue going on, then I will do a very slow introduction of the antiparasitic or whatever it might be to just help diminish any issue and get them bounced back. And so far I've found that's been the best way to acclimate like any species I've brought in. Now, that being, of course, I've had my fair share of death still and whatnot, trying to acclimate a species, but it always comes down to how they already arrived to me. If they're already in poor condition, their kidneys are shot more often than not, and you cannot reverse that, unfortunately. So once their kidneys are shot, even if you do your best, a couple months down the road, they're unfortunately going to pass away. And another reason, I did want to mention this, for parasite treatments, there's some medications you can't use with certain species, or they're hypersensitive to it, or they'll just straight up kill them. No one's done research on that for like Chironius and Pseudoxanodon. We don't know. Right. And why should I risk an animal that's outwardly perfectly fine with a medication I don't know? And I have unfortunately ran into this situation. So I had 5 Pseudoxanodon macrops. And when I moved from Toronto out to where I am now with a friend for a little bit. They were super stressed out, but it was a bit of a heat problem more than anything, because like my friend's place was a little too warm for them, and they started dropping weight really fast. And I was like, okay, obviously they do carry parasites. So I did a very, very low dose of what was it? It was Panicare, I think. Yeah, it was Panicare, which is normally safe.
Right.
And
yeah.
I lost 3 of the 5 in a week. And it was like immediately after I gave the dose, and I made sure it was much lower than what was required for their weights. And the next day, like, they were immediately showing signs of poisoning. They were just like seizuring and everything, and so that was really shitty, and that just kind of affirmed the whole I'm not worming anything at all, period. Because I don't know if it was the heat plus the stress of moving that kind of just jumbled things up for them, and that's why they started losing weight. But so I just had 2 left, and those 2 I didn't worm. Figures.
Interesting.
And they were doing great. They started courting, and then my male, oh my god, he died for the dumbest reason.
Oh no.
Oh no.
I fed him, and he ate the frog backwards, and the leg just didn't go down properly.
Oh no.
I was like, oh my god, are you serious right now?
That's so rough.
Like, it's nothing that I could have controlled in the end, but really,
that's the kind of thing that it's like, how did
crazy.
these things live in the wild?
Like, I guess he ate it like basically like ass first, and the legs don't bend that way, and
Yeah.
So I'm intrigued by a few things you mentioned, Ashley, because I have some similar protocols here. Uromastics, regularly imported from the wild, really common for them to arrive at wherever their intended home is with just who knows how much shit, right? Whether it's from the stress of the process, whether it's from sort of subpar conditions at the import facility, the wholesale facility, you name it, they can end up with a lot of stuff. And I tend to err on the side of don't medicate unless I absolutely have to, right? So if the animal's actively losing weight, actively not eating, actively showing really severe, or not really severe, but like, to a certain level of symptoms where it's like, okay, I can't just let this go anymore. However, I have noticed that a substantial percentage of them, if given solo housing and, perfectly adequate conditions, will resolve on their own. They just, whether it's their own immune system or whether it's just a certain passage of, who knows what, certain passage of time, they're able to kind of manage some of these problems on their own. And I've kind of felt for a while that oftentimes this obsession with having some sterile animal is more to do with like the keeper's paranoia than it is with the animal's well-being. So like, you mentioned people, you get at some wild caught animal and everybody's first instinct is to put them in a hyper simplified, hyper sterilized enclosure with very little stimulus and, paper towels and what have you. And even though I understand that there are certain circumstances where that's worked well for certain animals, it seems it's like kind of a drag, and you can't help but feel bad for those animals. And it's like, okay, did you set it up that way because you think the animal needs it, or did you set it up that way because you don't want to have to wash nasty diarrhea off of cork? You know what I mean? And it's like, and it's and it's definitely most of the time it's the latter, and we make all these excuses to justify it. And again, I'm not trying to say that these rationalities don't have a place, but the idea that it's to be able to monitor feces, to be able to monitor any kind of external parasites or anything like that. It's like, dude, if you're paying enough attention to the animal, it doesn't have to be on paper towel for you to notice that something's wrong. you know,
Exactly.
like he really does not. And I understand how when you led that off as, you know, kind of black sheep style, because I've caught a lot of shit for that, for not medicating as often, or not being as willing to do so. And I've even taken it a step further in a few situations. And one I'll note now, which is I had a female Uromastix yemenensis who I had introduced to a very large male. He was I mean, I'd never seen an animal of that species this size. I don't know what his deal was. He was absolute monster, double or triple the size of every male that I have currently in my collection.
Wow.
And the female was pretty resistant, and so the male shifted from breeding behavior to territoriality and aggression. And he took a big bite on her side, on her well, it was her left side, and he took a big bite, and it didn't look like terribly detrimental, but it was not purely superficial. It was a pretty substantial injury. And I phoned my vet and just asked him what he thought I should do. And he was like, well, you know, just give it a day or two. You know, usually a lot of these animals can kind of persevere through these injuries fairly easily, and it might be more detrimental to bring her in, have the visit, go through the you know, whatever kind of, you know, antibiotic or you know, like an ointment or something like that could just drive her nuts. So just let's see what happens, right?
Well, it stresses them out even more.
Yeah, totally,
Yeah.
right? So he was like, let's just wait. And so the long and the short of it is that she chose a hiding spot directly underneath her basking site and stayed there, only coming out every few days to nibble on a little bit of food and then going back into that hide. And after like 3-4 weeks, she emerged completely, did a whole normal routine where she basked, ate, defecated, and then shed off the whole injury, the whole thing. Like it was a chunk of her side. It was like a giant chunk of her body that just shed off. And she actually, now, if you're looking at her flanks, one of them dips in a little bit, and she lays odd numbers of eggs. So she doesn't lay even clutches. She lays odds. So I think it even had internal damage. But she just walked it off. You know what I mean? And again, I don't want to suggest that anybody follow what I did, because if your animal gets hurt, you should take him to the vet, right? But I do think that, I don't know, the whole reason for mentioning this is I really do think that there's a lot of overlap between when we're, you know, are we talking about somebody making changes for the sake of the animal or for the sake of their own anxiety? And then when do we, you know, at what point is our interference more harmful than it is anything else? Yeah, I don't have a specific question or anything. It's just sort of
But it's true. It's so true. And like animals in the wild survive with the worst injuries possible. Like you see all these limbs and stuff, and it's like clearly they know what to do for themselves, you know?
Yeah.
And interesting, you meant the whole diarrhea and the cork thing. So something popped up in my head that I often hear from people is, oh, if you don't treat, you're just reinfecting the animal. And
yeah.
Are they eating their own feces? No.
I mean,
you know,
some of the Euros do, but
like with snakes and stuff, they're not gonna go around and be like, this parasite loaded poop, I'm gonna eat it and reinfect my
Come on, guys.
Yeah, I've always thought that was more about like keeping a sanitary environment too, you know, and just like when a snake scats, you remove it. You know, it's like but obviously there are a lot of folks out there who have their hands full, and it's in there longer than ideal, I guess. But
sure. Well, and of course, depending on what you're looking for and where you're looking for it. Again, most of my experience lies with desert lizards in particular. And man, you go out to Southern California and you find chuckwallas living in rock crevices right adjacent to pack rats and, 25 other different animals living in the same spot. That pack rat nest is packed full of, rat shit and debris and bones and all kinds of stuff. And you find feces scattered all over wherever the animal wants to shit, you know. And of course, we're talking about a different context, right? So there are probably bacterial and organic means through which some of that stuff is taken care of before it ever becomes a real problem for the animal in question. However, you have to imagine that at least on a microbial level, there has to be some resilience in these animals against some of this shit. Uromastics in particular, it's been a long part of the conjecture within the Uromastics niche in particular that pinworms are just a part of their natural gut flora. It's just the way they just have it, you know. And so, you know, it's even in the vet, that's made its way into the veterinary practice around Euros. You know, you get vets who really pay attention will note, oh, well, you know, a certain level of pinworm population is totally fine. Last year I had my baby Egyptian Uromastics. I had to get a fecal test for them because there was a zoological institution that was purchasing one of the babies, and they wanted to know if it was like if it would get a clean fecal from the vet as a part of the purchasing process, which I was like, okay, fine. I took samples from the whole clutch, you know, just 3 or 4 random samples from inside the cage to the vet. And these were perfectly healthy looking stools, like they were a log, dried log, you know? And the vet took a look and he was like, called me and he was like, well, look, there's a grip of pinworm in there. But if the babies are eating and doing their thing and growing and the poo looks like this, it's clearly not a problem. So I will sign off on this as a clean fecal because it's obviously fine. And that was mind blowing to me, you know, because I spent some time in my early days in herpetoculture kind of being one of those people we're talking about, being a little bit of a sanitation obsessed, sterilization obsessed kind of keeper, but since changed that. But yeah.
I think that also there's something to be said for like what you were speaking to, Ashley, about like taking, like if you have these tropical species that are used to highly complex, you know, environments, and you're putting them in this super sterile Spartan environment, that it's stressful for them. And that it also, like, even if you have the intention of eventually putting them into a complex environment from that sterile quarantine setup, that's just another shock that you're adding into the trajectory of this animal's like introduction into captivity. And I've actually experienced that firsthand where I've imported, or I've acclimated several Spilotes sulphureus at this point. And the first one I did, I had her in a pretty Spartan setup. It did have substrate. It actually was even like a bioactive substrate with springtails and stuff, but it was very simple, just like a simple hide, some, you know, fake plants, branches. And I moved her from that after, you know, 3 months or so of quarantine right into a highly complex naturalistic vivarium, and she immediately stopped eating. And I basically lost that like 3 months of progress that I'd been making with her because of the shock of that transition.
Well, oh, that sucks. Yeah. It's I don't know. I think almost this day and age, it sounds very strange to say, but I almost find a lot of wild caught animals to be safer than a lot of captive bred animals with all the diseases that are now in captivity. Like, I swear to God, I'm not picking on ball pythons, but rhinovirus, crypto, you know, like it's prevalent because they're kept in such high numbers in a small area, right? And you're not going to have that from a wild caught animal for the most part, unless they're held at an importer or an exporters in high concentrations. You know, otherwise you're dealing with maybe mites, and that's it. You're not going to be killing off your entire collection from an invisible virus you don't see. And I know that's probably a bit of a stretch for me to say that, but at least in my experience with the snakes I do have versus some other people, I hear collections just collapsing from a ball python they bought from XYZ breeder. And it's just like, it's mind blowing to see that happen now. And another thing to add to the whole acclimation thing is food. It's so important to give them the proper food. You know, not everything eats mouse. Not everything eats fish. Like unfortunately, I keep things that like frogs. And
Extremely unfortunately.
it's not cheap, but you know, and I import in, oh God, at least 1,000 frogs a year for a feeder. Yeah, and
Wow.
it's a disgusting thing to do just in terms of cost. But if I'm to get these species going and acclimated, I'm not going to be like, hey, I'm shoving a mouse down your throat just to kill you from the high fat diet. You know, it doesn't work that way.
What types of frogs is there a specific type of frog you're using as a feeder, or does it vary?
So I mostly use the golden tree frogs out of Vietnam and Indonesia. I'm very leery on trying other species because there's a lot of toxic frogs out there, right? This time I am bringing in, because I tried to order like 800 golden tree frogs, but the guy was like, no, that's too many. So I'm trying I forget the exact common name. It's Rana livida, which is like the green mountain frog or something. They look like green frog, like the American green frog almost. Those and microhyla, which are pygmy frogs. They're like these little tiny things. So, and I've known people to use them as feeders. I've used the livida once or twice before with macrops that came in accidentally without much ill effect. So should be okay. But unfortunately, that's just a risk I have to take because there's no literature at all out there in terms of if they're toxic or not. The only one I found for the Rana livida was that they can secrete a foul smelling like secretion, I guess, because they're secreting it.
Foul smelling something.
Yeah, but nothing about being detrimental or toxic, just a bad smell. So I was like, you know what, being they're going in the freezer as freezer pets, I'm not worried about that part. So should be okay. But yeah, feeder is very important to feed the right thing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Go ahead, Phil.
Oh no, I was just gonna literally say the same thing you were just gonna say.
Oh well, I mean, on the subject of frog feeders, I feel like that is just like a consistently stressful one for me. I have the Xenodon Pulcher and the Xenodon Dorbignii here, both of which are primarily frog eaters, and I give them Repti links, but I have them in pretty small numbers, so that's reasonable to do. But I'm always stressed out about the thought of like bringing in wild caught frog eating species, because it just feels like there's something about the parasite load that comes in with frog eaters that's just like on another level. And I was recently talking to Brittany, our friend Brittany Williams, about this, and we were just talking about how, thinking about it on like a watershed level, you know, it's like if you're working with species that are occupying the bottom of the watershed, they're going to have the highest concentration of stuff, you know, and like, I think that's really helpful to think about it in that way. And it also came to mind when you were mentioning utilizing tree frogs as feeders. I wonder if there would be any difference in like the average parasite load between like a tree frog versus like, you know, a swamp frog.
Yeah.
I think that there's probably a massive difference there.
Yep.
But I hadn't even thought about using tree frogs as feeders. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I find tree frogs, just based on that principle alone, would be a lot safer because they sit up in the trees. They don't go underwater. They don't dig in the mud and stir up all this like literal shit.
Yeah, totally.
You know? So yeah, that's I always freeze my feeders too. Like, I know that's not like a foolproof situation, but it helps immensely. Really, there's not much to worry about past that. And the one thing too with parasites is there's a cycle that most goes, and majority of the time they're not even reptile specific. They're just passing through. You know? And
intermediate hosts.
Exactly. And sometimes they just get kind of trapped in this vicious cycle because they don't have their next host to go to. But there was something I was gonna say. I forget. It'll come back, but
So I'm curious, the import-export side of what you do are I mean, this is a topic that's really fascinating to me because you know, I can't tell you how many messages I receive from people overseas who want the animals that I produce, the Uromastyx in particular. And I know a handful of people who handle that on the state side, but it just seems like the most bureaucratically dense and expensive and absolutely mind-numbing process. I mean, how did that become something that you decided you wanted to partake in? And for starters, and then how do you find it as doing it regularly? Like, is it something that you enjoy or that you kind of regret getting involved in, or is it much easier than I'm making it out to be? I mean, tell us a little bit about it.
Okay, so I'll start with the nice part of how this started. Mangrove snakes, actually, when I was younger, that was like my dream snake to have, and they weren't around anywhere for the most part, like especially captive bred, off the tables for the most part. And like this was back in 2007, I think. And I had this obsession with mangrove snakes. No idea how to get them. I just seen pictures online. Like, I don't know if you guys seen it or remember it, but Reptic Zone, that really green forum, just everything was green, and it was like, it's so like old school. But I was on that forum site, and I'd see like the odd photos getting posted by people, and I was like, how do you get these things? Like, they're not in Canada. I can't find them anywhere. And I was like, I just got to import it from the country, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
And obviously that's not happening to someone who was like 16 at the time, because importing. But I knew about how like to get them, but I don't know how to do it, right? It's like, I don't know how to get it from freaking Malaysia, you know? But over the years, like I ended up finding one in Canada, and I was like totally addicted past that. And I discovered the Divergence, the nice blue mangrove snakes. And I was like, I need this. How do I get it? And I was scouring the Naturalistic site in Germany for just to see if they happen to be around. And I ran into a seller on that website that was selling an adult female long-term captive Divergence. I was like, oh my God. I contacted him. I bought her. I had no idea how to get her.
Oh, man.
But I just wanted to buy her and just like, screw it, I'm buying it just because, and I'll figure it out later.
Yeah.
And that was that. And he was very patient. He held her for a few months while I tried to figure it out. And I contacted, like my end here in Canada, what I have to do in order to do a shipment. So they told me how to get my import license, what I have to do from there. And I did have some very basic background on the process, like of where to go, because there was someone that used to import Indonesian species, and I'd go with them because sometimes they'd have to get the shipments inspected and there'd be venomous stuff, and he wasn't a venomous person, so I would be helping Environment Canada officers with the venomous species since I had that bit of experience. So with that, I kind of had an idea how the process worked. I wasn't completely blinded by it. And then eventually I found two people in Poland who happened to have the first generation captive bred Divergence, like a couple babies, and they offered me a pair. And so I bought those as well. And they knew a friend that exported. So those animals then came over to me, and then that's how it all started. And when a few friends realized I did that, figured I'd do like a little friend shipment, and then it's kind of grew from there more and more once I kind of got the hang of it and started getting relationships, so to speak, with people in Europe. So that's how that happens. Now, sometimes, to answer your other question, there are days lately where I'm just like, I wish I had a 9-to-5 job. So there's days like, if I explain it to somebody in a nutshell, it sounds smooth, it sounds easy.
Yeah.
You buy animals, you sell animals, or you pre-sell animals, you pay the seller. Like, that's what I do. Like, I'm not a normal importer where I buy everything and then sell it here. I advertise on behalf of European sellers who just don't have the time to do it, or they want to, broaden their horizons a bit of selling. So they all go on my website, or I just tell people in PM or something if they don't want them to be public on a website. And so I make the sales for them, and I forward the money all to the seller in Europe. Mine is like, I don't know, like if they're selling it for like, let's say 100 US, I'll put like 110 just to cover any fees that I might have to, cover or whatever. So they get their portion, I keep back whatever there may be left over. And, of course, with that might sound all good and dandy, but now comes the part of when they get imported in. Am I do I have missexed animals? Do I have miscounted animals? Or was the seller just shady in general, sends a completely wrong species? You know what? All this has happened. And it's difficult to deal with because in the end, I am just the broker. They are not my animals. I did not purchase these animals for resale. The buyer chose to get these animals indirectly through the other seller. And I always try and help rectify that the best I can. And usually it's fine. It's no problem. Like, I'll discuss it with the seller, what to do. Is there a refund, partial refund, replacement, like what's going on? It usually works out fine, but there are times where some sellers are just like, fuck you.
Yeah, sure.
So in times like that, like, it's not much I can do there. Like, I sent all the money to the seller. This isn't profit for me at that point. And like, I try and make that very clear in my terms of services, but people don't read them.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's a bit of an issue, but it's very rare that ever happens. That's usually the biggest issues I have. But actually, here's a great example. So I bought 40 garter snakes, this shipment that came from someone I know and I trust, but it was a friend of a friend. So it was his friend, basically. And I don't like doing that usually because it gets a little squirrely because you're buying from a seller who's buying from another seller. And I like doing that because it gets a little funny. And go figure, he got the animals last week and there's like 15 dead. And and I'm just like, excuse me, how is there 15 dead and 17 missing? He literally just dropped them off to you. And turns out the guy just didn't feed them at all since they were born.
Oh my gosh.
Like, are you fucking kidding me right now? And it's stuff like that makes me really upset that I don't want to say that I'm involved with that. It would have happened anyway, whether or not I bought them or not. I can't control what the breeder did. And it's stuff like that really puts me off. But at the same time, if I don't keep up with this import job and keep doing it, you know what? I don't want to. I'm not trying not to toot my own horn here, but majority of importers have a bad rap of not taking care of animals, not giving a shit. And that bothers me, and I want that to be a changed stigma because it's not true all the time. Like, yeah, there's a lot out there, but there are people out there that genuinely care. So, but then there's times like that where I'm just like, why am I doing this? Because that's horrible. And to break that to the customer now, it's like, hey, by the way, and I just feel like a piece of crap, kind of, because I feel horrible about it,
Yeah.
But past those issues, it is a really good job in the end because I get to experience a bunch of species that I never normally would, and I get to see people experience these animals as well for their first time or adding to their group. And out of all the bad, there definitely is a lot more good to it. I'd say 90% of the time they go smoothly. It's no problem. My biggest issues I ever have is having to be a collection agency and trying to get people to pay, So that's the only issue for the most part that I end up having consistently, because I always have to pay the sellers ahead of time and then collect funds after the fact. So that was another issue. I had this shipment. This shipment was a little extra this time. The one coming in next week. I had someone buy like a $7,000 lizards. They put $1,000 deposit on them, and I got told a few days ago that they're not going to do it now.
Oof.
Oh. And I'm like, excuse me.
Wow.
They're off, and I was just like, oh no. So yeah, to say at least I was a little miffed, and
understandably.
Yeah. So stuff like that is the worst of the import side of things, and this is also why I don't buy first and then resell later, because if they don't sell, that's like a couple $1,000s you're losing, I'd rather the $6,000 left over on this animal and attempt to just resell that versus a whole entire shipment. But it still sucks. It really sucks.
So go ahead, Roy. Sorry.
No, you go ahead.
So I was just going to say, kind of piggybacking on that train of thought, how, if at all, how has your view of herpetoculture changed as a result of this aspect of your business? Yeah, if that's applicable.
Very, actually, extremely. I have come to realize and appreciate that there's a lot of keepers out there that love the variety of species. And like forever, I was just thinking, oh, everyone just wants crested geckos. The common stuff. But for the amount of animals I bring in that are not those species blows my mind. So I have I'm just trying to think, my feeders aside, of around 1,000 animals coming in this coming shipment. And not one of them is a leopard gecko, not one of them is a crested gecko, 2 are ball pythons just because I have a deal with one breeder. But that's it. The rest are all these other obscure, uncommon species that people have learned to come and appreciate. And with that, dealing with people in Europe, they are years advanced in terms of their skills. And seeing the enclosures and the way a lot of these sellers that I'm now good friends with keep their animals and how they do things, it's just mind-blowing. And I think with these imports, I have learned that there is a lot more out there than we don't see. Because everything in North America, for the most part, that we see online visually anyway, it's just, bins, sterile ball pythons, whatever. And there's actually a lot more out there that they keep to themselves, and that is humbling in a way, because that means people truly do cherish their animals. And that is my ultimate drive in the end, to keep doing these shipments, is to help spread that. Like, there are people out there that do this, and it's amazing, and I love it, and I want to see the best care possible when it comes to these animals, and that's the way I do it.
Yeah. I'm wondering if you could expand a bit more on that, like, distinction that you noted between kind of North American herpetoculture and European herpetoculture, and like, if you have any insight into like maybe what are the things that are maybe contributing to that difference. And then I'm also curious if you notice like a distinction between herpetoculture in like the US versus Canada, because I feel like you're like in this very unique position of having a pretty like clear window into all 3 of these different places and the different ways in which herpetoculture shows up in them. So yeah, I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, for sure. So the North America and Europe distinction, we'll kind of go with that first. God, people are gonna hate me after I say this, but that's okay. Like, I use this term a lot. I'm sure you've seen it a lot now, Roy. North America has this, what I call ball python syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
Europe does not. And there is a reason for it. So Europeans, as a general rule of thumb, I've found they tend to be more on the nerdy, sciencey side of everything. They're always learning, like a lot of the books on reptiles stem from Europe. If it's not about like morphs or common species, they're all European people. And I don't know if it has to do with some of the laws out there, because some of the laws, like I think they're a little newer, but I'm not sure. But there are standard laws for keeping. Now, not so much in terms of keep it naturalistic or not, but it's space, like floor space. If you're keeping a rack, let's say a ball python needs to be in, I don't know, something like 2 times the length of its body by 1 time the length of its body. It's either Germany or the Netherlands, but they all have their own little standards like that. And they all keep very oddball species, which require the naturalistic setups. And I don't know if it's like the chase for the rare and uncommon that drives them, but even if it is, it forces them to keep properly and advance herpetoculture in general that way. I mean, honestly, if I never discovered the way Europeans keep, I'd probably still be doing bin and rack too, just because I'd have no idea. Here in North America, everyone just keeps to breed for the most part and produce the first morph this, first morph that. And that's in Europe as well, just not to the same degree, but it's always the same species that follow this consistent, whatever you want to call it, ball python syndrome. Whether it's hognose, it's ball pythons, it's corn snakes, it's king snakes, it's all the common stuff that follow that. But people who don't see what happens with the naturalistic side of herpetoculture will also keep the uncommon species the same way because they don't know better. Or they get told in their ball python or hognose group that they have to go and sterilize their little twig they found with 10 cups of bleach plus hot water mixed in with freaking formalin. I don't know, that scares people from doing the right thing. They feel like it's more of a hassle to dump in a bag of dirt and throw sticks in and plants, or even if it's fake plants, whatever, but they find that's more of a hassle because it's scary. They're introducing these invisible parasites or whatever, but really, what do we have to worry about at the end of the day? Maybe termites, maybe ants, but you know what? You'll see that ahead of time before putting anything in the enclosure. And I think it comes back to the sterile bin situation that people are just so paranoid. They don't want to leave their comfort zone here in North America. Whereas Europeans are just do what they do. They keep them as naturalistic as possible. And it's almost like they kind of enjoy the art of the enclosures. Like they enjoy their animals, but the art of building the enclosures, it's a thing. And I get such joy in getting my enclosures put together. It's like, it's getting your hands in the dirt and everything. And it's gardening indoors, it's a great feeling. Once you have your masterpiece, so to speak, done, it's nice to look at. But that's the difference.
Sorry guys, can you hear that noise?
No, we're good. I can't, at least.
Okay, great. There's somebody literally sawing something outside my door.
I do crazy stuff too.
Sorry, Jesus Christ.
It's all good.
Could you hear the wolf dog howling upstairs earlier?
No. No, so cool, man.
That's awesome.
I mean, so yeah, I've been thinking about this kind of thing quite a bit, just over the years for all the reasons you would, but also just recently in my own practice here with the Uromastics, because I think that what you're saying is so on point in the sense that there are a lot of keepers, again, primarily in Europe but all over the place, really, who, they keep for different reasons. And I will say, though, that there is an issue that comes into play with scale. So, like, obviously, as you scale up, your practices have to change a little bit. And I've sort of been wondering, because again, there's a certain level of scale that one must achieve depending on the goals that you have for what you're keeping and why. So obviously the average keeper, they don't really need to worry too much about scaling up and how that's going to affect their protocols. But someone such as myself, where I'm scaling up the number of Uromastics that I have fairly regularly, and granted, they're coming from a different environment than a lot of what the two of you are working with. There are limitations to what I'm able to do with the animals because of the fact that there's 150 of them, right? And that changes things. And I don't necessarily mean that as a rebuke of what you're saying at all, but I don't know. I was just sort of wondering what your thoughts might be on something like that, on a perspective like that.
Yeah. So there is always the compromising side of everything. And I tell people this a lot. Actually, my other half, he is / was, he's a hognose guy, does the morphs and all that, which is whatever. Like, I respect the animal for what they are. I think they're pretty.
Oh, yeah.
And that's not even my issue. It's just what people do to them, right? And he has found a way to compromise because he has noticed a vast difference of basic bin keeping versus naturalistic. So he actually got this beautiful unit now of these same enclosures for all of his adult hognose, but he did the mix and mash of, instead of being completely naturalistic, like he still has them on like wood chip, but he incorporated UV lighting, basking light, and cork bark to at least be able to initiate those natural behaviors. And even if someone's a rat keeper, you could still do that within reason. Like even if you can't provide a basking area, you can still put cork in there. You can still put foliage to keep their stimuli going, right? There's nothing wrong with that. So, and if you want to keep like everything in a rack, whatever. Like when I have imports come in, I have a rack. It happens. It's not the end of the world. It's not as bad as I might make it sound like. But as long as you could give them some stimuli, it's fine. It's not that bad. Like, of course, if you give them UVB, it's even better. A snake isn't going to kick the bucket overnight if you don't, as long as you can pull prey or whatever. And like, I totally get it. The more you have, the harder it's going to be. But there's always a way to compromise that one.
For sure. For sure.
Yeah.
I don't judge anyone. What I judge are when snakes are in a tiny little bin and they're pretzeled up and they can't move.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, that's hard to reconcile at the end of the day, no matter what. I think for those of us who really are considering the welfare of the animal, and I think that what you said earlier about like just like people keep for different reasons is a salient insight in this. And just that's something I think about a lot, is just people arrive at herpetoculture with totally different motivations sometimes, and I think that like there's definitely space for that within, the field and within the practice. But I think that there is something about like I noticed that a lot with the kind of the European style versus North American style debate. And it seems like there is more of an emphasis on like the enjoyment of just keeping the animal and like an interest in natural history and like ecology of the animal. And that seems to be often more what's motivating it. And I think that there's a way in which, like particularly in the US, the art of the side hustle has become just like the big thing, like everything has to be a side hustle. And I think that in some ways that can kind of like, it can just, it just changes the motivations. It's like if it's a different, they can be complementary in some ways, and they can also be at odds with each other if you're not considering the welfare of the animal, and I think it's also a totally different thing for herpetoculturists who are, like in Phil's position, like where it's like you're a professional herpetoculturist. It's not your hobby, it's your livelihood.
Yeah.
And so that's a whole other conversation around scale. And I don't know, I guess I just like appreciate to like conversations like this where we can bring in that nuance and consider like, yeah, this is actually a huge field, and the way that people arrive to it, the way that people decide to do it, and the reasons that people continue to do it are often changing and different. So,
and yeah, I think all of that's really, really well said, man. And when I was thinking about, even though Roy and I kind of make a point to leave these as unscripted as possible, because we think really the interesting stuff about what we do kind of comes in at the margins, where it's not about the direct questions. It's more about like, how we arrive at some of the questions and what some of the side stories, all that's really cool. But like, we also tend to have like a few questions ahead of time that we have just, in the event that conversation dies down, we can kind of keep things going. Right. And Roy came up with so many good questions. And that one in particular, the question about the difference between keeping in Europe versus keeping in North America. And then I think also we can add in keeping in Asia, because it's also totally different scene in Asia too. Right. And this was a really interesting question to me, because I'm also an artist. I'm an illustrator by trade. That's what I went to college for. I don't really do that much anymore, but that's also something. There's a really clear and distinct dichotomy between the practice of fine art and illustration in Europe and the practice of fine art and illustration in North America. In Europe, no one would ever question why anybody would want to become an artist, or how you want to make work, or what kind of work you want to make. No one would ever question that, right? They'd be like, oh, great, art. Like, art's really important. And some of it is surely because they're surrounded by millennia of artworks, right? But also, here in the United States, if I'm drawing somewhere in a sketchbook, and I'm out, one of the most common things I hear is, whoa, you must do a lot of drugs, or like, whoa, you should do my tattoo.
Yes, I get that one a lot too.
Yeah, and it's like, don't get me wrong, like, okay, I'm all here to talk about drug use within the creative endeavors, right? And I'm all here to talk about, and I'm tattooed, like, I'm all here for tattoos. But like, the fact that that's the default response, like that's like the average human assumes that that's the thing you're doing, right? Yeah. And I feel like there's a parallel between that and herpetoculture, which is, I've never heard any European have to justify their captive keeping in that regard. Whereas here in the United States, I always feel like this sort of background pressure to justify what I'm doing through the lens of like, let me make this digestible for you fucking peasant. You know what I mean? Like, it's and it's fine. It's obviously we have to, we gotta be good ambassadors for the industry and what we do and all that other stuff. So I'm never going to try to like belittle people who ask me those questions, but it just sort of begs the question, like, where is that difference coming from? What do you think about that?
I think it's online, honest to God. Okay. It really is, because it comes back to all the basic, easy to keep species. So all the recommendations is the basic, easy way to keep them. So that must apply to everything else, as a general rule of thumb. That's what they were raised with, and that's just how it is. And everything is easy. Okay. This is just a theory, but everything in North America as a native is easy as shit to keep. Corn snakes and rat snakes and garter snakes, they could survive a freaking nuclear bomb in a house and they'll still live. European species, not so much. And they have access to Asian species for decades longer than North America has. They're attached technically, right? And I think that might play a role because here they could just go out and catch their first rat snake or go to Petco and buy their first snake. Whereas in Europe, they don't have that luxury. They have a lot of laws, especially for their native species, where they cannot capture them or keep them. And if you did, it has to be like years and years ago, and you have to have like a full line of proof of origin that they're all captive born and bred, so on and so forth. So a lot of their stuff for pets have always been more of an exotic species, and so they've always had to learn how to take care of them properly. I could be pulling this out of my ass, but that's what makes sense to me, is because in North America, you always see posts of, oh, I found the snake. What is it? I want to keep it.
Yeah.
You know, it's so common. It's so popular, other than your common ball python and stuff like that, which are still basic keeping. God, where am I going with this? But I think that's just kind of where it all derived from, maybe. But
yeah, I feel like there's probably so many factors that are contributing. I think a lot about just like the baseline, like socioeconomics, you know, and like cultural values, of course, come into it. I feel like, Phil, you were kind of speaking to that about just kind of like dignity around being an artist, you know. And I know, you know, like, I mean, a lot of my community is artists, you know. My sister's an artist, my partner's an artist, yeah, there is this like thing of like, when I tell people, oh yeah, like my fiance is an artist, I think that a lot of times they're like, oh, so you guys must be starving.
Yeah. Totally.
You know, there's the starving artist trope, you know. That's like such a thing in at least in the US. I can't speak to Canada as much because I don't have any firsthand experience of it, but I imagine it's probably similar in some ways.
Yeah, I don't do much anymore just because it's,
yeah,
everyone thinks it's a fun little child hobby, and it's like, no.
Yeah, totally. There's just like a different cultural value, you know, an imperative placed on that. And also like what is considered like what can be considered a livelihood. It's almost like art can't be considered a livelihood in North America. It's like, that's not acceptable. You're not contributing to society, but which is like so silly and ironic, right? Because everyone is obsessed with art of some form, you know, whether it's music or visual art or poetry or writing or whatever, you know. It's like, it's part of what makes us human. It's part of what sustains us. And, you know, I think of that also ties in with herpetoculture, you know. Herpetoculture, I mean, Phil and I talk about it all the time as like as an art practice in many ways, or as having parallels with art. And yeah, so I just wonder about that too, as like a contributing factor, you know. And
I bet it is, because again, like when I put my enclosures together, it's basically working on an art project.
Totally. That's how I do it too.
Yeah, you get that same happy feeling. Once you're satisfied with what you got, it's the same exact feeling of, yes, I'm good with this.
Yeah.
Again.
Yeah. Well, and there's also this weird element of, so like with the art anyway, you're right, Roy, that people are obsessed with art of various forms, whether it be their music or whatever. But then there's all the art that everyone takes for granted, whether it's the logo on the package you just purchased, whether it's the like the Netflix special you just watched, whether it's the interface you're using to experience that Netflix special, whatever. And I think the same thing happens sort of in it, not specifically in the herpetoculture industry, but in the pet industry in North America. People take it for granted that they can go get a dog anytime they want. They take it for granted that they can go get a cat anytime they want. And people tend to not make a big distinction automatically between having a dog or a cat as a pet and having a lizard as a pet. People just come in with the base assumption that these animals are available, standardized, domesticated, and whatever. Like, it's just, this must be the way it is, because that's the way it is with my dog or my cat, and or my guinea pig or whatever it may be. And I think that there's an element of immaturity there, and I don't necessarily mean immaturity of the people. I just mean immaturity of the culture, right? There's less emphasis in the United States, at least, on process and resilience and the kind of accumulation of experience and time that comes with expertise, or invert that. And I mean, to a certain extent, I think some of it is just going to be a matter of time, right? You get enough people paying enough attention, and eventually, as soon as everyone knows a kid who had a pet lizard, or as soon as everyone was that kid who had a pet lizard or a pet snake, then it'll probably be much less common, because it'll be like, wow, because I don't know anybody who thinks that way of their aquarium. I don't, like I've never met anybody who it's like, oh, my hobby is maintaining saltwater aquariums. I'm never like, this guy probably just has a little bubbler in the corner of his room. Like it's like, oh shit, this guy is like a chemist and an electrician, and it's probably very creative. I mean, there's so much that must go into that, right? And it's the same thing with what we do. It's just not as well understood that way. And I'm wondering if that's got to do with like reaching a critical mass culturally, to where enough people are aware, or that level of awareness, or and I think that's, at least from my perspective, I feel like that's the primary difference between us and Europe. Is like, in Europe, it's just been a part of the culture there for a lot longer. More people have been doing that for more time. And so it's maybe more understood and accepted broadly. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm going to take 2 seconds to get more water.
Sure. Yeah, do it.
Yeah, I think that's well, it's easy to forget that as nations we are youngsters. We're the eager kids, on the block,
right?
For all our might and influence in the world sphere. It's like, I appreciate that insight around kind of the maturity and kind of capacity to grasp nuance and
just like the, so we were talking about, let's say, if we're going to say three, we got the United States, we have Europe, and then we have Asia. And so unlike the United States, not like Europe and parts of Asia, where you're just growing up, like you're just going to be a part of, you're going to look around, and there's, I've spent some time in Greece. I've spent some time, in Berlin. I've spent some time, well, I haven't been to, but, sort of peripherally familiar with like aspects of Japan. And in these parts of the world, you could be walking to school and you turn the corner and there's a 1,000-year-old temple. You know what I mean? And you're just like, oh my God, like that's a different level of connection with that kind of practice. And here it's like, like what's that? There's like some famous joke or saying that like in Europe, you could walk by a park bench that's older than America, It's like, it's like just this park bench is 500 years old or whatever. That's a totally different level of like saturation of art and creation and production, and a whole different level of thought about where that's going to go. Because if you can grow up thinking, I can create something that has lasting effect in the world. And in America anyway, I can't speak too much to Canada because I've only been there a few times, but like it seems like the predominant feeling is that it's just like everything's throwaway. And by the time we, maybe in a few hundred years, when we've got stuff that's been around for a lot longer, and people grow up thinking like, man, look at this crazy 500-year-old Mount Rushmore or whatever. When Mount Rushmore is like 1,000 years old, if America is still a thing, it's going to be like, whoa, it's going to be like totally mind blowing to be a kid growing up and looking at these giant heads carved out of stone. It'll just be a different experience, and maybe that'll lead to a different kind of practice around what we do.
Maybe. Yeah, Canada is very much the same as the States for the most part. Really not much different other than typical stereotypes of we say sorry a lot.
Yeah, you guys are way nicer.
You're more
Yeah.
polite.
Yeah, so much more polite. Yeah.
Like I grew up in the States for a good part of my life, and just the way the life is, it's the same.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Good to know. Well, I would like to get in a little bit more questions about just kind of like your journey with herpetoculture. And one of the things that I'm curious about, I mean, I kind of want to ask this question of everybody that I'm interested in herpetoculture, but it's just like who has inspired your journey as a herpetoculturist? Like, are there keepers or individuals like past or present that you look to as like, yeah, this person is doing cool stuff and inspiring?
That's a good question. There's really no one in particular.
Mm-hmm.
This might sound super cheesy, but if anything, it's the reptile that inspires me. Because every time I change something for the better, I'm hoping, in the enclosure, I see more behavior, like more really cool, interesting behavior. And that's my ultimate drive in doing better and achieving a goal. When I first started keeping, it was a good friend of mine, still to this day. He ran, it wasn't his, but he was like a manager in a reptile department in like a family-owned store, like pet store. And he already was one of those keepers that he kept all the weird, obscure, random species and everything. And it wasn't like corn snakes or whatever. It was like ackies and frilled dragons and tiger rat snakes. And
sick.
This is what I was introduced to keeping reptiles from the get-go. And he would teach me so much when I'd help volunteer at the store, just because I wanted to experience. Like, he had his tiger rat snake on display at the store. It's the coolest thing ever. And just seeing all these different behaviors and interactions with the environment is just, that's what's driven me just to do better. And I've done the bin keeping thing and versus this, and just seeing the difference, I was just like, nah, I just want to keep doing this, persevere for the better. And in the end, yes, it's the reptiles that I won't say I look up to, but you know, they're the ones that keep me going to follow for a goal. There's really nobody out there in particular otherwise that I would say I would idolize.
Yeah. I really like that answer. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, me too. I like that quite a bit. And because it's, you know, it's I feel like it's so that might actually be a better way to move forward, or not move forward, but like it's so funny. It's a great inversion of the thought process that we have in asking that question, I think, because so often I am still, I mean, obviously still very inspired by specific people and what they do. And a lot of it has to do with how they're thinking about the process itself. But at the end of the day, I feel like your answer is probably more succinct, because I mean, I feel like the answers lie in the animals themselves anyway, just in general, right? Like in the spirit of being more responsive to the animals that we keep, because that's the compass, is their responses in a lot of ways. So I actually really like that answer a lot.
Yeah, I like to just sit and stare sometimes at the enclosures, and not even at the animals. Like I look at all the wildlife, like the little microflora that are in there, and I'm just like, I don't remember seeing this type of springtail. The other week, I discovered something completely new I had no idea existed in one of my enclosures. Actually, it's my pseudoxenodon enclosure. I was just trying to take a video of some springtails for a friend of mine, and I was just moving some substrate around, and I see the dirt moving, and I'm like, what is this? And I can't quite make it out because how tiny it is. So I took my phone and I zoomed in, and God frickin' forbid it was a black mite. I'm like, oh my God, there's a freaking mite in my enclosure, and not just like a green mite or anything, a freaking black mite. But I'm staring at it and I'm like, it doesn't look like a snake mite, but it's black and tiny. Like, what is this? You know how snake mice are black and they have that little white spot right on them?
Yeah,
that's how you identify it. It didn't have that spot. It was really round. And I'm like, what the fuck? So I asked a friend of mine that's really well versed in bugs. He's like, that's a globular mite. I'm like, what the fuck is a globular mite?
Globular mite?
Yeah. So I
You don't know
Googled it.
globular mites?
No,
Yeah,
bro.
yeah. And I was like, huh. And they like to live in decaying wood. So they're just part of the
Cool.
plant group.
That's wild.
Interesting. And like, I love watching the microfauna. Like I want to again in the future, but where I live doesn't allow for it. But as you know, Roy, too, like I've kept marine fish.
Mhm.
And watching all the microfauna in a marine tank is crazy. From the like the live rock you bring in and the coral and all that, it's something else. And I'll just sit there at night with the flashlight and just like watch everything, you know?
Yeah.
I don't care about the fish. I'm watching all these little things, and I do the same thing here. And that just maybe it's not directly related to the reptile, but it still helps me learn about the environment and how it all works and just ties in together. And at the same time, while I'm doing that, like I'm not moving much. The reptiles they're doing their thing, and I kind of learn off to the side what they're doing while I am observing other things.
That's something that I feel like every single person I've ever spoken to who's highly dedicated to herpetoculture has said the amount of time I spend just looking at all my shit is unbelievable. Like it's you know what I mean? And it's really great. I've had some similar experiences actually. So like a couple that come to mind is one where I was sitting around watching an ornate Uromastix. This was like 7 years ago. And I was just watching him cruise through his enclosure. And I watched a little spider, like a little wolf spider, crawl out from under a stone. And I was just like, oh, weird. I like didn't realize there was any spiders living in here. And then all of a sudden the ornate came over and ate him. And he just grabbed him. And I was like, oh shit. Okay. Like, so apparently bugs, are not going to be a big deal occasionally. And surely everybody here has eaten stuff that I've never eaten. Sorry about the train if you hear that.
It's fine. It's not so bad.
Okay, good. But anyway, the point is that surely all of this stuff is just eating things that I've never noticed, never paid attention to. And then the second one is I keep a big Dubia colony to feed my Xenogama taylorii, and I almost never get like escapees with the Dubia, but every now and again I'll find a little Dubia out somewhere in the shop that just managed to get out. Either I dropped it and didn't see it or something like that. And I came in to my shop one morning and my big female Egyptian Euro was basking, and but under the UV light, like not under the heat light, under the UV light, and there was a big adult male Dubia sitting right on top of her head, just hanging out, and she was totally fine with it. She was just like, just like no problem. And I was like, oh, all right, I guess you guys are bros, like the I love seeing that kind of interaction and relationship, and it's weird when it happens, because as you mentioned, you can, even if it's something that ends up being a little peripheral to what you're actually applying yourself to, those kinds of weird observations and things like that really, I feel like bring a lot of spontaneity and fun, basically just fun to what we do. It's really,
absolutely love it. Love it to death.
Yeah, heck yeah.
Totally agree. Yeah, I the place that I was keeping my reptiles at before I moved them here was this basement, and it wasn't super well sealed to the outside. Like, despite my best efforts to seal it, there were just nooks and crannies and all sorts of stuff would end up in there. But what I noticed over time is that wild herps had discovered that it was great to hang out in my 2 herp rooms because there were errant insects to feast upon. And I think I found like 4 or 5 different species of native herps in those 2 rooms over the 2 years that I was there.
That's great.
And in one case, a tree frog in one of the enclosures. I don't even know how it got in, but it was just, I was like, what? There's a frog in there with the polycrust or the polycrust right now. Like, where did that come from?
Dude, I'm sorry, Roy, I just got
No, go for it.
one other little interesting story. So I worked at a reptile shop here in Colorado called Reptilian Haven. It was the first reptile shop in the state. And I worked there from approximately 16 and then on and off until I was in my early 20s. And from well before I arrived there to well after I left, there was a tokay gecko that had escaped a long time ago and was completely wild in the shop. And there was like a one part of the wall had like a false door where the wall where like you just pull on the wall a little bit and it was open the door, and that was to like the water heater and all these other things and stuff. And that's where the tokay would lodge himself in that little gap between the door and the false part of the wall. And so we tried for years to catch him. We just tried for so long. No way, dude. That was the single best. That tokay was an absolute master of deception and escape. And he made it work. And you could see him because, he wouldn't bail immediately, which is why we thought we could catch him. So we would pop that door open and take a little look at him just to kind of keep track and see how, make sure he wasn't looking terrible, because he would always, and all you would see was just like these streaks of shit from him taking a dump. But anyway, it was fun because you could see as the seasons changed, you could see his body weight change, and so he was eating, he was surely eating roaches and crickets and spiders, probably other geckos and stuff that would, or anoles that would get loose once in a while. I mean, surely he was doing that, It was pretty fun to see that, well, that resilience, that adaptive capacity, and just to see him crush it for that long a time, I mean, I no idea whatever came of him. I hope he met a good end, but I suspect he might not have, because I don't know how long tokays live, but I'm going to imagine it's a long time. And and that store shut down sometime in my mid 20s, and I have no idea. So I'm sure that he probably got lost in the changeover or something like that. But he had a good run at it while it was there. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty cool, right? Yeah.
I think that's something that maybe I have like this recollection of going to like East Bay Vivarium as a kid, this kind of legendary West Coast herp shop, and it's in Berkeley, California. And I think that they had geckos that were just cruising around in there. Like, and I don't know if it was intentional or not, but I'm pretty sure I remember seeing like, house geckos or maybe even tokays just like cruising around between the racks and stuff.
It started unintentionally and then became intentional. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
It's good. Makes sense.
Yeah. So Ashley, I'm super intrigued by your perspective on herpetoculture because of your position as an importer and because of the time you spent working with sort of more obscure stuff. And so I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about, or if you have a formal opinion on this, like if there was say like a few things, 1 to 3 things that you either have major gripes on about herpetoculture broadly, or something that if you could snap your fingers and change about herpetoculture, what might some of those things be, and why?
Now, when we say herpetoculture, do you mean the way we keep, or the hobby as a whole?
Yeah, the whole thing, everything, all of the above. Yeah, I mean, obviously, maybe we're the 3 of us are killing it. We don't have to change a thing. No,
choose your words carefully, Ashley.
Yeah,
no. I wish those goddamn bins would go away.
Okay.
Not those long skinny ones. I don't know what they're called. But they're like this wide and like this long. Nothing could live in that. Who puts anything in that? A freaking garter snake baby shouldn't even be in that. That's number 1. I don't know what they're called. They're like the vivarium. No,
I think it's the vision.
I don't deal with bins. Oh, I don't know. Those long skinny people know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Those feeding rodents to anything and everything. There are options out there.
That's a good one.
Options. I'm sure you might have seen this too, Phil. I don't know, but I've recently made a gigantic post about hognose and what they should be eating.
Yeah.
And because the amount of times I've seen groups where they say they eat one prey and it's rodents, and it's like, no.
Negative. Yeah, I know.
Do this much research about them in the wild, and it tells you otherwise.
Yeah.
You know what? It's cheaper to feed them a varied diet than rodents all the time. A pack of chicken hearts costs $5, and that feeds roughly, I think there's 30 hognose here, twice.
Totally.
$5. You know?
Right.
You go buy a bag of lake smelt. I don't know, get reptilinks in the States, you know, and it's not that hard to do, but people are just so fixated on feeding snakes fatty steak, essentially, every single week. The biggest one they could possibly eat. And so that doesn't happen in the wild. Like, I know people say, oh, you shouldn't base off the wild, blah, blah, blah. But you know what? After all these thousands of years of evolution, it works. You know, the fattest mouse with chunks of globs hanging off them aren't going to come stomping over to the snake and every 7 days and be like, eat me, you know? And that's major issue number 2 I have. I think those are my 2 major issues. It's just the treatment of it comes down to the treatment of the animal in the end.
It's sort of convenience related, right? I mean, I feel like that's the same thing, or not the same thing, but some of that might come from, you know, like dogs and cats, right? Where if you change your food on your dog or your cat, they might end up with a little bit of intestinal distress. But it's like, I don't know, I've always had a bit of a different approach to that. Like my dog and I have 2 very pretentious house panthers for cats, and they get new different stuff all the time, and we've just always done that because we never wanted a cat that would turn up its nose to food or anything like that. So we would just always were rotating in new foods and new food types. And you're right, it is cheaper, but I mean, it's cheaper financially, but it seems maybe perhaps a little more expensive cognitively for people right? But I mean, but you're absolutely right. It's better. There's just we all know, well, we should all know anyway, that even for people, like a diverse diet is a good one. You should have a lot of different stuff with a lot of different colors and a lot of different food, you know? And the idea that you can feed animals this one thing and it's the perfect food item. It's like, no, sir, I don't believe that's a thing. You know, there is no such thing as the perfect food item. And it is strange. I mean, I'm curious how that, like, what might be a good way to go about instigating that kind of change other than example, you know, because it's so nice to watch what folks like yourself are doing, Ashley and Roy also. Like every time you put up a video of one of those polychris feeding on a phasmid, I'm just like, this is yes, like this is so sick. It's so cool, man.
That's how I feel every time too.
Yeah, I bet. It's yes, dude.
I don't know why. It's just cool.
It's really cool, man. It's really cool.
You keep Euros.
Yep.
And you understand, like, all herbivorous reptile keepers understand the importance of a varied diet. Because that one piece of collard green is not going to have the same thing as the kale freaking in your other hand versus the peas versus whatever. Why is it that people think mice have all the nutrients an animal needs?
Right. Well, and that's a very good point. And again, to what you were saying earlier about, you know, or what we were all talking about, which is the being responsive to your animals. I used to keep collared lizards, quite a few, various species. I love them to death. And years and years ago, I fed one of my male Crotophytus vestigium. He's a Baja collared lizard. I fed him a banded gecko because they eat lizards. And dude, I caught so much shit. Like, people are like, just feed bugs and all this other stuff. And I'm like, okay, couple of things. First is, are you suggesting that you're going to subscribe to a hierarchy of life, that somehow a gecko is inherently more valuable than a cricket or a mealworm, which is weird, which is obvi, bro. Hashtag obvi. But second, those animals have extremely strong seasonal food preferences. Around September, the end of summer and into fall, they don't want insects. They don't. They just ignore them. The stuff that they would have charged a week later, they absolutely ignore. And then you throw a lizard in that cage, they lose their minds. Like, they just go, they hit it like a truck, you know, just bam. And so that's an element of responsiveness. Like, I'm trying to listen to what the animal needs, for starters, but also I fed him that gecko, and I didn't feed him for like almost 2 weeks after that. He didn't need it. He didn't need anything. He didn't want to eat anything. He would just sit out under that basking light and just like, just kick it, you know. Took a bunch of really big shits and just he was the happiest lizard of all time, you know. And it's really bizarre, the sort of like weird cultural costs that are paid for kind of deviating from the norm in some ways. It's weird.
It's interesting you mentioned this, lizard eating with lizards.
Yeah.
Leachianus. Let's go into this one.
Yeah.
Leechies are known to eat lizards on the regular. And it blows my mind. People don't put two and two together. Okay, yeah, maybe they eat fruit stuff. But let's look at their fecal matter when they eat this diet consistently. Do you think a stream of diarrhea down glass is normal? No, that means there's a problem, you know.
Right.
And I've had a friend kind of experiment and feed, you know, their crested geckos to the leechies, and guess what happened? Perfect little poops.
Pellet.
Yes.
Yeah, dude.
Exactly. And so, okay, let's look at a crested gecko. They eat bugs, but they also regularly eat fruit. But you know what? When they eat the crested gecko diet, they don't have diarrhea like the leechies do. So their body is catered to this fruit diet. Leechies are not. Like, to them, it's, I guess it'd probably be like a more of a luxury thing once in a while, or to supplement part of their diet. That's not what they eat normally. And everything about their excrement says that. But no one puts two and two together. If their dog has consistent diarrhea, you're gonna think that's okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
You know.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
No. You go, man. All you.
I was just gonna say I'm often discussing this with folks about the Xenodon again. You know, just because they're, you know, it's a hog nose. Like, yeah, give it mice, and but then there was also like this persistently held belief that Xenodon only lives 6 to 8 years, like usually 6 years. And I mean, maybe that's right. I don't actually know. Like, I want to be really clear in saying I don't actually know what is achievable for their lifespan, but my impression is that 6 years is probably on the short end. And I think that they could probably live a lot longer than that. And so I've been experimenting with I only feed them like frog reptilinks and iguana reptilinks and day-old quail occasionally, not rodents, because it's really clear there's a handful of diet studies out there about these species in their native range, and it's amphibians, reptiles, and squamate eggs. There's no rodents whatsoever. There's not even birds, which is, you know, controversial, but I think quail nutritionally, in terms of nutritional profile, is much closer to a lizard than it is to a mouse.
I was about to say, like, minus the fur, you're looking at the same thing.
Yeah, it's really similar. And so And so far, like, they're super healthy, vigorous snakes. You know, I mean, they're not up in age yet. They're still young, but like, I see, you know, people posting these snakes all the time, and like the general body condition that's expressed is like overweight. Like
Oh,
that's
yeah.
and that's considered standard. And so people, I think, like incoming keepers and stuff like that, they're aiming for this body condition that actually isn't even healthy for the snake. So maybe it would be possible even to keep them more healthily on a rodent-based diet, but not with like a weekly feeding schedule. You know, it's like, look at the animal, and if your snake has like scale separation, you know, like you can see the
Mhm.
interstitial skin beneath, you know, between the scales, it needs to be fed less. It's
Yeah.
just,
I
you
need
know,
to attack
like,
that for a second.
yeah, please.
Nice.
So, while feeding lean rodents less often might work, it won't.
Mhm.
Because
Yeah.
I'm going to be hoarding all this fat because, oh God, what am I getting fed next? You know?
Yeah,
Mm.
totally. Yeah,
And
yeah.
now
Good
you're
point.
running into a problem now.
Yeah.
Well, and also there's, so about, you know, in terms of like the feeding of other reptiles to reptiles,
Mhm.
I mean, I can understand why people get kind of squeamish about this, right? I mean, I've had animals here hatch with, you know, every now and again you get one with a severe deformity of some kind. It's
Mhm.
pretty rare, but it happens. And historically, when I had a lot more carnivorous stuff, I would feed those deformed
Mhm.
animals to the carnivores, and
Mhm.
they would go nuts for it. They'd be very happy about it. But like, I mean, the squeamishness is just so misplaced. One,
Mhm.
because again, how are you making this distinction between a rodent, a quail, a frog, a lizard? They're
Yeah.
all totally valuable, valid animals, right? And
Mhm.
and then you know, and then people will say, you know, it's like I've kind of ruminated on this topic before publicly and caught a little shit for it, but it's like, man, you want to talk about a um, potential mitigation strategy for overpopulation. I mean, it sounds really dark, right? And I don't mean it literally, right? Like
Mhm.
I'm not saying let's take all the unwanted animals and feed them to other animals. That's not necessarily that's not exactly what I'm getting at here. But I am saying that, like, you know, the arguments I've heard from people have been things like, oh, well, you know, you should give everything a chance. It's like, well, we don't do that with anything. We don't do that with the stuff that we eat. We don't do that with the stuff we keep, right?
Mhm.
We're gonna choose to preferentially to keep different stuff over other stuff, and then we send out the stuff we don't want to keep into the ether and hope for the
Mhm.
best. And it's like,
Mhm.
okay, well, come on, man. Like, you're gonna freak out over one animal being fed to another animal. I mean, it's like, how is that different than your rodent? How is that different than sending it out into the world and hoping for the best?
Yeah.
You know, and
Mhm.
turning a blind eye when your animals end up somewhere where they're not being well cared for, or turning a blind eye where your animals are put into situations that are, you know, maybe less ideal or something like that. I mean, it's like, come on, you know, let's be a little bit more pragmatic here about why we're choosing to do certain things. And yeah, I don't know. Hopefully, I mean, the problem is, I get it. It's like a little dark. People don't want to, you know, people don't want to think
But
about it.
it's
But
true, though. It's absolutely true.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I think that a lot too. Some things, like if I see a spider or something, like, oh, kill it. It's like, why? It still has a heartbeat.
yeah.
Mhm.
Right.
No different than you or me. It just looks fucking different.
Right.
Yeah.
know?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
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 Well
w-
said.
well, so we have one question, Ashley, that unless you have other stuff, Roy, or you
No,
good?
this is great.
Okay. So there's one question that we ask, we've decided we're going to ask every guest, and feel free to take it as open-ended or as narrow as you like. But that question is, why herpetoculture? So, you know, whether that's a personal answer, or whether that's an answer that you feel like is a great example for other people to latch onto, but like, why why do we do this whole thing? You know, what the hell? Why, God damn it? You know?
Yeah, you know what? I was on the phone with Dan Maliri the other day. And while it wasn't directly about herpetoculture, he asked me, he's like, why do we do this, Ashley? You know?
Yeah.
And the first thing I said was, it's in our blood. Whether it's
Yeah.
keeping, it's just something that's been with us forever, especially when it comes into the more in-depth part of keeping reptiles like we do. It's a question with so many answers, but no answers at the same time.
Yeah.
You know?
Totally.
Yeah.
I do it to learn about life. You know, ultimately in the end, for me, it comes down to learning about how the world works, the cycle of life, and just how everything has a reason, you know? But that's also because everything I do is very naturalistic, bioactive based. I get to experience how nature works in my own living room. And I think I guess that is what really gets me just wanting to be within the herpetoculture life, I guess. That and sharing my knowledge that I've learned with other people, whether they hate it or not. It can be very controversial, but I don't care, you know. And I've noticed lately people are much more open to these suggestions. Again, the hognose dietary thing I put out, someone shared it to a hognose group, and I was like, oh no. This is about to be bad, you know?
Here come the flamethrowers.
Yeah, but it was actually received amazingly well. But the way I portray it versus, you know, instead of just saying hognose need this, that is it. Instead, I take all the knowledge I have learned while keeping, put it into my own little word vomit, and it just, I had to have it make sense so people could also understand it. But with all the people thus, you know, accepting that fact, I have fulfilled a vital part of what I want to do with keeping in terms of helping other people, helping other animals in the future. Even if it's just one animal in the end out of thousands of people that might have seen that, that's still one more animal. You know what? That makes me happy. That is what drives me. And to me, what is herpetoculture is learning and experiencing and moving forward.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's a great answer.
I don't know if that answered it, but there's my answer.
That was
one.
great. Yeah, I relate to a lot of that.
Sweet.
I was actually thinking that just like in the kind of conversation we were having about just like, yeah, feeding animals to other animals, you know, and like, I think that there's just so much discomfort around death and dying and, you know, and stuff. And, yeah, like that's actually like one of the values of herpetoculture, you know, is actually getting to see these things play out in some small way, you know, and have some more familiarity and utility with that, because that's here to stay.
Yeah, dude. Yeah. Yeah. Oh God, life eats life, right?
Yeah, I don't want to live in a bubble. I want to learn about it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Have you ever y'all ever seen this, like there's this bumper sticker that's kind of like ubiquitous? It's like Earth and then like ART in the middle is like
art. Yeah.
Art, you know?
Yeah.
And Catherine, my partner, had one for a long time that just said death with eat emphasized. And I was just like, yes.
I
so
want
good.
that. I want that bumper sticker, dude. Wow.
I mean,
I'll try and find it for you.
If we go down this little path, God, someone's gonna hate me. I'm sorry if any of you are vegetarian. They always talk about killing animals. You're still killing a plant, people.
Totally.
Like, it's still a living creature. It just doesn't move.
Yeah.
Well, and you're also still killing animals. You're just choosing that, you know, you're still paying for the combine and the harvesting, which is going to kill, you know, small rodents. It's going to kill bugs. It's going to kill caterpillars. And it's just like, so you're hiding again. Yes, exactly. Yeah, deers that bed in, baby deer that bed in the fields and things like that just get ripped up in those combines, and it's like the hierarchy of life part is really really difficult. And look, I'm no Jainist, right? So for those who might not be familiar, Jains are a specific sort of religious sect that carry, one of their kind of hallmarks is they'll carry a broom with them and sort of sweep the ground in front of them as they walk, so as to not inadvertently step on any bugs and things like this. Sort of have very restricted, limited diet. I believe Gandhi was a Jainist, if I'm not mistaken, but don't quote me on that. I'm not 100% certain. But like, I'm no Jainist, but like, there's definitely some kind of balance to be struck there in the understanding what you eat, why you eat it, and the fact that if the shoe were on the other foot, if you were plopped in the middle of anywhere with large predators, you're the rodent. You're gonna get eaten, homie, and no one nothing cares. Nobody's gonna take your karma into account when they decide whether or not, it's like, oh, I'm just gonna eat the liver out of this guy. That's gonna be fine. And then it's not even just that. It's like, it's no, and then there's this whole, and I do appreciate this, but there's a sort of a subgroup of people who believe in sort of eating the entirety of an animal every time you use it. And that's awesome. If you can do that, knock yourself out, right?
Yeah.
At the same time, orcas will eat the liver out of a great white shark and leave the rest of it to just whatever. And it's like, well, there's no like utility in that. It's like, you just ate what you wanted and left the rest. It's like, it's those damn killer whales.
The way I think about that too is also that it's like, it's not like that other stuff isn't getting eaten.
No, of course, no, totally, yeah,
it's getting eaten.
Oh yeah, it's getting yes, yeah.
That's eaten by you. It's eaten by something else.
that's the charity of predation, is what it is.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, totally. I mean, if anything, I think there's a lot of that conjecture around our development and how we might have scavenged the kills of larger predators, and that's the charity right there. That's passing on the good vibes, man. It's like, I got what I wanted. I ate the heart, brain, and liver. You can have the rest. Yes, I love marrow.
But that's literally how life works.
Yeah.
Everything works in unison that way.
Yeah, for sure.
Totally.
You're right. Well, that about it, Roy?
Yeah. I think that's a good place to wrap it. I kind of reeled us back in there with that little tangent, but I think it was worthwhile.
No, it was fun.
Someone that's going to see this or hear this are going to be like, what kind of dark, creepy people are these?
Yeah.
Or they'll be like, oh yeah, they're herpetoculturists. They're just like us. But
I hate vegetarians.
Ashley, Bill's trying to get us just booted from the channel here.
Totally canceled.
Ashley, where can people find you and all that, and not add you into the friendless purgatory?
Well, business wise, Northern Lights Reptile Imports on Facebook. If I respond is another question. Not on purpose, but I just get busy and forget. But there, or email, it's all there on my page, on my website, or just hunt me down and be a creeper on Facebook. And then, I might accept you as a friend. I might not after I creep you back. And that's
perfect.
All.
Awesome.
Nice.
Well, thanks so much for taking the time to talk with us today. This is a really generative conversation, and I'm sure that our listeners will get a lot out of it. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you as well for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll definitely have to have you on again in the future, if you're up for it anyway.
Yeah, no problem. General banter of craziness. Heck yeah.
Yeah, heck yeah. Well, here, I'm going to stop the recording real quick.